that it made the skin along his arms feel tight. A rancher for more than 3 decades, he knew the voices of every animal on the place. This Whinny was not one of those voices. He had come out to the barn because sleep had been elusive for months, and checking on the horses filled the long, quiet hours before dawn with a small, familiar task. Buttons, the old mare, slept peacefully in her stall. The gelding in the next stall breathed even and calm. The sound came from the far end of the barn. David grabbed his flashlight and walked down the aisle, the beam cutting a clean path through the dim, and his boots making hollow echoes on the concrete. At the last stall he stopped. The empty stall he used for storing tack and extra straw now held a small, wobbly figure. A foal stood in the corner on legs that looked too long for its body, those newborn legs that splay and tremble until strength returns. Her coat was the charcoal shade foals are born with before the grey lightens, and the fuzz of baby hair still made her look tiny and fragile. She might have been 3 or 4 days old, and she was entirely alone. David swung the flashlight over the stall and searched for a mare, another horse, a person who might explain the presence of the foal. There was nothing. A clean pile of straw that hadn't been stacked there the night before, a bucket of water, and a small bag of milk replacer for foals leaned against the stall wall. The foal whinnied again, wobbling toward him on uncertain legs. That was when a piece of paper tied with baling twine to a tiny halter became visible, wrapped carefully around her neck. Hands shaking, he untied the note and unfolded it. The handwriting was blue ink, a little trembling but careful, and the message read like an apology and a plea at the same time. The foal's name was Destiny. She had been born 4 days ago. The writer could not keep her and could not explain why, but the writer believed Destiny was everything good in the world and begged that she not end up at auction. The note asked the finder to give the foal a chance to become what she was meant to be, and said the writer had watched the man with his horses and trusted him. It ended with an apology for leaving without explanation and a thank you for saving the foal's life. There was no signature. David read the note again and again, the letters blurring in the weak light. Destiny stood there, dark eyes huge and curious, reaching her muzzle toward his hand. He wasn't supposed to be single at 56. The plan had been different when life was younger and full of plans. Build a life with a partner, pass on knowledge to children, teach the next generation how to read a horse's mood and a pasture's needs. The ranch had taken a different shape after a winter accident years ago when the man who had been his wife slipped on black ice and was gone. There had never been children, not from lack of wanting but from circumstance. The ranch was 120 acres nestled against the Medicine Bow Mountains in southern Wyoming, a place of sage and wind and long horizons. David ran a modest cow-calf operation and kept a few solid ranch horses, the kind that worked cattle all day and still had energy for chores. He had inherited the place from his father a decade and a half earlier and had been running it alone for 8 years. Quiet suited him then, and most days that quiet felt like peace rather than loneliness. He had raised foals before, started colts with a light hand, taught young horses to trust people and work. But he had not bred in 5 years. Cattle paid the bills and solitude became the rhythm. So the presence of an abandoned foal in his stall, left by someone who had driven up his gated drive in the dead of night, and left the animal in the empty stall, unsettled him. Whoever had come had to know him, had to have watched him with horses. The idea that someone had deliberately left Destiny with him made his skin prickle. Protective instinct stepped forward first. A newborn foal is delicate, especially one possibly deprived of colostrum, the first milk that transfers essential antibodies. Foals this age need feedings every 2 hours in the first weeks and careful monitoring of health and temperature. He knew how fast a foal could go down if infections set in or dehydration took hold. The bag of milk replacer gave hope that whoever had left her had thought about immediate needs. David mixed the milk replacer with clean water as the bag's directions advised. using the high-quality formula rather than the cheap stuff. Destiny sniffed the bottle, bumped it with her nose, and after a messy trial that left splatters across David's shirt, began to understand the nipple. It took patience, a full 20 minutes, and the quiet coaxing that comes from years of working with animals, but the foal took to the bottle and quickly drained 16 ounces, whiskers frosted with milk foam, tail swishing in small, contented motions. While she ate, he checked her carefully. Bright eyes, pink gums, skin elastic enough to show no immediate sign of severe dehydration, an umbilical stump that looked dry and clean. Someone had cared for her at birth. But if that care had been present, why abandon her now? Questions multiplied without answers. Legal procedure required a report to the sheriff. Paperwork had to be filed, a process that David completed the same day. A deputy said the law would allow the finder to keep the foal if no one claimed her within 90 days. The deputy also confided something that carried a weight of fact. Whoever left the foal had come to him on purpose. The note's line about watching him with his horses confirmed it. Someone had trusted him enough to place that tiny life in his hands. The question remained why. He became an investigator by habit rather than training, asking casual questions around town and at the feed store, mentioning an abandoned foal and watching faces for recognition. Nothing concrete surfaced. Veterinarians in a broad radius had no recent records of a grey mare giving birth. No microchip information pointed to ownership, and the brand inspector found no brands on the foal to trace. Inspector Rodriguez ran a hand down Destiny's legs and called out how well-bred she appeared. Good bone, pretty head, comfortable movement for a youngster. That only deepened the mystery. One did not carefully breed a horse and then abandon the result unless something shocking had happened. The voice on the note had been almost desperate, apologetic, and certain at once. That line lodged like a thorn in David's thoughts. 2 weeks after the foal was found, a conversation in town turned the direction from mystery toward story. An old friend and neighboring breeder named Robert had heard about a new foal at David's place and asked to see a photo. When he saw the image, he paused a long time, then spoke a name, Sterling Silver Dream, and suggested that the foal might be the offspring of a mare with a history in the competitive scene. The mare's owner had been a woman named Christina Wells, a successful competitor in events that rewarded precision and show talent, a rider whose horses had earned substantial purses and whose foals often sold for high prices. That information tugged at the case from a new angle. David felt the cold drop of worry. If Destiny was the result of a high-dollar breeding, bred to a stallion with a stud fee of thousands, her presence on the ranch was worth more than the average foal's life. Robert added something else that hissed beneath the surface of the puzzle. Christina had been seriously injured in a riding accident 6 months earlier. She had suffered a broken back and head trauma, spent time in a coma, and was not the same as before. Rumors swirled that recovery would be slow and incomplete. David looked at the note again and then at Destiny, who investigated the farm with the fearless curiosity foals possess, calm enough to trust the hand that fed her. If Christina had been incapacitated, who had been looking after her mares, why would the foal have been released onto a ranch in the night? More layers appeared. Robert knew of a neighbor, Elaine, an older woman who had been checking on horses near Christina's place. Rumors had it that Christina's brother, Richard, was trying to gain control of her assets while she was vulnerable. The idea of a family member attempting to sell horses and liquidate property while someone lay recovering in hospital made the situation feel like theft under the cover of law. David read the note again and thought about motives. If someone wanted to protect Destiny from sale or auction, the choice might have been to move her to a safe place where the foal would be respected as a living being rather than quickly turned into cash. That still did not explain why no one called, why the foal was left secretly. A late-night drop-off raised legal risks and moral questions. A chance conversation months later with Christina herself answered more of the puzzle. David found a phone number and left a message as the registry suggested. A reply came from a blocked number and a voice that was not as strong as it once had been but still had clarity. The woman introduced herself slowly as Christina Wells. Her speech was slurred in places from injuries but sharp in thought. She told how she'd been riding Dream, pushing for a new maneuver, when the mare bucked and threw her hard. Waking up in the hospital had meant hearing the worst news about fractures and head injury. The hardest loss, she said, was not the physical pain but the thought of her horses being scattered while she could not manage affairs. Her brother had filed for emergency conservatorship, contending she was mentally unable to manage. Richard began selling horses while she was incapacitated. Of 6 horses, 5 were gone in quick sales. Only Dream remained because she was close to giving birth, and moving a heavily pregnant mare is difficult and risky. Elaine, the neighbor, had stepped in to help. When Dream foaled, she called the rehab facility with what should have been good news. But she also told Christina about Richard's plans to sell the mare and that the foal was at risk of going to market with little regard for lineage or future training. Christina explained how a plan formed between her and Elaine. They would hide Destiny's existence from Richard to keep the foal from being sold or liquidated. Elaine transporting the foal to a place where the foal would be safe until Christina could be well enough to assert ownership. That place became David's barn. Christina admitted to having written the note herself, hands trembling as she tied it to the foal's halter. The handwriting might have matched the paper found in the stall. She said she had chosen David because his name came up often when neighbors spoke of honest, humane men who treated horses with respect. The note had been written fast and apologetically because secrecy was necessary. David listened as Christina described losing control of her life during recovery and the painful fact that she could not fight in court until she proved recovery. The conservatorship had been filed by Richard and was still pending. He had started selling anything he could move quickly. By the time she could begin a legal fight, there might be nothing left. So she had asked Elaine to carry one small piece of her life to someone she believed would care, someone whose hands and heart she trusted. The foal was worth a lot of money on paper, but Christina's decision was not about money. It was about preserving a living link to the life she had loved. The foal had value as potential that a greedy hand might not respect. David sat with these facts like stones in his palms. An injured woman trying to protect the last thread of a life she loved, a brother maneuvering to take control, a neighbor willing to risk paperwork and trespass to move a newborn foal. The legal details were thorny. The foal had been moved without the conservator's permission. If Richard had been the conservator, taking the foal might look like theft, however compassionate the intent. A call to his lawyer added clarity and caution. Beverly, who had done estate work after the winter accident years ago, told him bluntly that involving himself could mean legal trouble if the court found fault in how the foal changed hands. But Beverly also said something else that carried weight. If the conservatorship were improper or premature, it needed challenge, not only to protect the foal but to preserve a person's right to manage her own property when she could prove competence. David, who had never sought trouble and avoided courts when possible, found himself pressing forward. What started as a simple decision to care for an abandoned foal grew into a legal and moral stance. He and Beverly arranged for neurologists and rehab professionals to evaluate Christina's cognition and capacity. Evidence of steady recovery, though not complete healing, became the center of a strategy. The proposal was creative. A partnership where Christina could retain ownership and decision rights while proving competence, and where David could provide the hands and space to care for the horses during ongoing rehabilitation. A business plan outlined Wells Jenkins Performance Horses as a joint venture that would preserve assets and provide an accountable structure for management. A judge, persuaded by expert testimony and the clear plan for responsible stewardship, dissolved the conservatorship with conditions. Christina would continue rehabilitation, and the courts required a co-manager to help keep the operation safe during her recovery. Richard contested the decision, but lacked evidence that his sister remained incompetent. The motion to reinstate conservatorship failed. 2 weeks after the legal victory, Elaine drove Dream back to the ranch. The grey mare stepped down from the trailer and moved into the paddock like a queen returning home. Destiny, now a month older, stronger and more curious, recognized the mare's voice and ran the fence line in a frenzied display of joy. Dream answered with the deep, maternal nicker that reunited them instantly. The sight of mare and foe pressing into one another, the soft mutual sounds and the foe's trembling relief, struck something deep in everyone watching. Elaine sobbed openly. The reunion made the risk worth any cost. Christina came to the ranch months later for the first time since the accident. She arrived in a wheelchair with Elaine's help and a cautious, hopeful smile. Her recovery had progressed, her speech had regained clarity, and her hands had steadied. She and David stood by the paddock watching Dream and Destiny graze under a wide Wyoming sky tinged with spring green. The mare recognized her owner, and the woman reached out to lay a hand on the familiar face of a horse that had been by her through competition and training. Destiny, 6 months now and growing into her name, approached and sniffed Christina's hand, deciding on trust. Christina praised the foe, calling her smart, brave and willing. She named the foe Destiny for a reason she had felt when the breeding was planned, a sense that the foe was meant for big things in the arena. No single person could have predicted the ways she would shape human lives by simply surviving. The partnership took shape over months of work and small choices. Christina could not ride as she had before, but she could teach. Her knowledge of performance training was deep and precise. David handled the heavy lifting, the daily chores and the groundwork with the young horses. They rebranded as Wells Jenkins Performance Horses, not for profit fast track, but as a place to heal, train and rebuild a business that respected the animals as living partners rather than assets to be moved for quick cash. Recovery had changed Christina in other ways too. The accident left quieter, more careful perspectives. She was grateful for small victories like walking without a cane for 10 steps, and for the dignity of making choices again about what should happen to her horses. The ranch regained a rhythm not felt in years and became a quiet hub for clients needing gentle starters, careful handling and earnest training. The skills Christina taught and the steady hands David offered created a balance. They recovered other horses from bad sales and held to a slow but steady plan for recovery and return to sport. Destiny grew into her name in stretches, a yearling with a light dappled grey coat that brightened as months moved toward summer, a young filly with correct conformation and intelligence. Ground training began with simple things, leading, standing for grooming, learning to accept a halter and gentle pressure on her neck. The work was patient and careful, the kind that builds trust and endurance rather than quick results. Christina returned often, sometimes in a wheelchair, sometimes with a cane, but always with a notebook full of corrections and exercises. She taught the precision of maneuvers meant for an arena and explained the muscle patterns required for a tight spin or a balanced rollback. Her mind remembered sequences and rhythm even where the body was still relearning motion. The partnership worked not because it was planned for profit, but because it met a need greater than money. The restoration of purpose and of dignity for everyone involved. A small celebration marked Destiny's first birthday, a light-hearted gathering with neighbors, a symbolic cake made of oats and molasses safe for a horse, and laughter that sounded new on the old ranch. The foe tried to eat her flower crown, and everyone took pictures that would later become a record of repair. The legal fight with Richard had finished in the courts, but the deeper fight with loss and fear remained quieter and ongoing. Christina could not forget the months when she feared her life and legacy would be sold off while she lay fighting to stand and speak. Seeing her mare and foe together and watching destiny grow under care softened the memory of those dark days. The barn, once a place of routine chores and lone quiet, became a center of conversation, planning, and the steady noise of workpeople who came and went with feed and lessons. The ranch took in clients for training and careful starting, then moved horses back out to responsible owners. The business did not turn anyone into millionaires, but it provided enough to keep things steady. Dream became pregnant again, and the idea that a new foe might arrive in the spring felt like proof that life continued to make room for new chapters. Years moved forward. Christina worked hard in therapy and riding practice. She relearned balance, carving small gains from days of pain and fatigue. She rode at first with help, then solo under attentive supervision. When 3 years had passed since Destiny's first frantic whinny in a dark barn, the trio that fate had matched stood at the center of a very different scene. In an arena filled with lights and a crowd that hummed with attention, 2 riders and a horse stepped into the patterns of a competition. The announcer's voice boomed while the pair moved with precision. Christina rode Destiny in a Level 2 open reining division, a test of harmony between horse and rider, maneuvers that demanded pause, speed, balance, and trust. The mare, now a mature competitor at 4 years old, moved with strength and graceful power that belied the long shadow of her start. The spins came round and clean, the rollback coiled and released with the kind of timing that only arises from countless careful repetitions, and the sliding stop kicked dust as both horse and rider felt something beyond mere commands. The crowd roared with approval, and Christina's eyes shone as she felt the echo of every hand that had helped her stand, feed a bottle, groom a foal, and unpick the threads of a life that had been tangled by injury and family strife. They placed forth in a field of talented competitors, no top prize, but a ranking that felt like a full return to life more than the number on a scorecard. A call came later in the night from Elaine, who wanted to know how the round had gone. Laughter and tears threaded the conversation. Elaine had known from the start that Destiny was special. She had known the man who would keep her well. She had chosen the place where the foe would be safe. Now the victory felt communal because the cost and the care had been shared. The story of Destiny's arrival in a dark barn, the note tied to a halter, the secrecy and the legal fight, the months of care and the eventual partnership were not only about horses. They were about people who had been broken and who found ways to hold one another up again. David had thought years ago that the ranch would be his last quiet corner of the world, that his days would end with him as the only steady hand tending the land. Instead, he found himself part of a family of choice, a neighbor who had risked everything to save a foe, a woman who had fought to reclaim her life, and a young horse whose very existence had forced everyone into connection. That night on the hotel balcony overlooking arena lights, the man whose life was supposed to run out quietly felt grateful. The events of those years showed how small acts can change the directions of lives. A foe left in the dark with a note tied to its halter had become a marker for a new chapter. It had stitched people together, some who needed rescue, some who had to learn to trust again, and some who had to rebuild confidence in themselves. The legal battles proved that law and compassion can sometimes find a way to meet when people show courage and make plans that protect those unable to protect themselves. The training days, the stubborn hours of rehab, the sleepless nights feeding a foe, and the long afternoons teaching a rider to find balance in the saddle, all of it added up to a new kind of life. Destiny, once abandoned, fully became a living bridge between wounded people, a symbol of possibilities that can come when someone chooses care over convenience and connection over isolation. 3 years after being found, The mare's presence in an arena under the voice of a rider who had been written off as broken was proof of slow miracles, of medical teams that helped a woman relearn speech and movement, of a community that reached across fences to hold together what mattered, and of a rancher who chose to take responsibility rather than look away. The story ends not with a single moment of triumph, but with the ongoing work of living. Dream birthed another foe, the business continued in small steady growth, and the friendships formed in the barn held firm. The note that had been tied to a tiny halter and read by flashlight in the dark had been the beginning of a sequence of choices that led to legal battles, quiet therapy gyms, patient training rings, and a return to an arena where a woman and a horse moved together in a pattern that said more about healing than any medal could. The truth of it was simple. One choice to care, one act of trust, and one life saved had reached outward to mend others. When the story reaches the end of the narration, viewers are invited to share in the same quiet kindness shown in the tale. If the story touched the heart, subscribe to see more of these journeys, like the video to show support for second chances, and share it with someone who could use a reminder that small acts can create great change.